A lot of NFL news and notes to get into. Lloyd Vance does a great job covering the NFL. Also contributing writer for NFL Network. Kind enough to join me on a Thursday. What's going on, Lloyd?
Doing great, Q. Looking forward to another great weekend of football coming up.
Yeah, I said before you came on, I said I'm going to go out on a limb and say one of my upsets on Sunday, Cleveland's going to get their first win. I was a little shocked, first of all, that Jimmy Haslam came out and said Hugh Jackson is going to be the Browns head coach in 2018. So I totally missed a boat on that one. I thought, if anything, he was going to be fired. But how about the fact that they fire Sashi Brown? I mean, it seems as though this franchise, if you're going to get rid of Brown, then you would think you're probably going to want to bring in another head coach. I don't know what the rhyme or reason in thinking here that Hugh Jackson can win.
Well, he was a very well-respected coach around the NFL, and he did a great job with the Cincinnati team when he was there as an offense coordinator and some other teams. And I think they want to give him an opportunity to develop his quarterback, maybe finally get a chance to pick one. Let's face it, Sashi Brown and Dee Podesta and the rest of the analytics guys got it really wrong in terms of quarterback the last couple of years. They probably should have taken Deshaun Watson more than any of the other quarterbacks, trading away that pick and then having an opportunity to come around and get him again and missing on him for the second time was egregious. So Jackson's going to get his chance to get his guy, and we'll see how it goes from there. But Sashi Brown just was not the guy, and he just didn't understand the National Football League and how it worked.
Nah, I mean, you had an opportunity to draft Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. Now, the one thing the Browns have is they have a ton of draft picks. You have a couple, 2 first-round draft picks, 3 second-round picks in 2018. So you would venture to guess a good GM will be enthusiastic. Hey, I can come into this situation, and I think I'll be able to at least turn this team into a competitive team. Maybe not a winner right away, but because they have all those draft picks, they should be able to field a competitive team going forward.
They should. And there's some candidates out there, whether it's Louis Riddick or George Patton, who's been with the Minnesota Vikings, their assistant GM. These guys really know the league, and they would have a great opportunity, as you said, with all those picks. They'd be able to stockpile and start building that team. Obviously, very tough division that they're in, playing with the Steelers, who are perennial favorites, and the Ravens, who are playoff caliber as well. So, but they got to clean that situation up in Browns and give people time. Too often people are given 1 year, 2 years in Cleveland, and then they just get rid of them.
Yeah, well, we kind of saw this situation in New York, which I don't think either of us was surprised with. Geno Smith, he didn't play bad, but at the end of the day, Geno Smith is Geno Smith. They're going back to Eli, but the big news is that they turned around, and I think you had to do it. Mara had to get rid of McAdoo, and he had to get rid of Jerry Reese. And, Jerry Reese, yes, he won a Super Bowl. You can make the argument he inherited a Super Bowl winning team as well. He's had some good draft picks the last several years, but I think his downfall was basically they never addressed the offensive line. They spent all that money after they got rid of Copeland to clean up that defense, and you mask all the warts because you're spending the owner's money. It just seemed as though his shelf life, his time has come to an end, and I think they had to do that, and they had it. You're not going to fire the head coach and not fire the GM in that situation. I think both of them had to go.
Definitely in that situation they had to. And those two sealed their own fate with that benching of Eli Manning. It seemed like they were the only two that discussed it. They did not really talk to Mara about it. And it was a very unfortunate situation. Just made him look even more buffoonery around that great organization that's one of the NFL's cornerstone organizations. And they knew they had to make a change. So McAdoo out. I think they will find a young, energetic general manager. I know that Ernie Accorsi's getting involved here at a consultant level. Maybe Dave Gettleman coming back, who was with the Panthers, and they were able to build that team in a Super Bowl contender. So they will find a solid general manager. And then they got to get a GM in there. And I think it probably is going to be an offensive type of guy, head coach. So interesting times for the Giants, but they had to move on for those two. You were correct.
Listen, anytime a general manager wins a Super Bowl, let alone 2 Super Bowls, he did a good job. He did a great job. But here's the problem. If you look at Jerry Reese's track record, and I did a double take when I saw these numbers, he selected just 6 Pro Bowl players in 11 drafts. Just 4 of his draft picks signed a second contract with the team. I mean, think about that for a moment.
Right.
So, again, you masked the warts by spending a lot of the owner's money to clean up that defense. Now, let me ask you something. Two questions. A, do you think Eli Manning will be back next year with the Giants? And B, do you think he can still play?
First off, I don't think he'll be back with the Giants. I talked to some people up there, and it's their gut feeling as well as mine that he may have had enough. Now, maybe Mara can get that goodwill going once again, and he can have another opportunity, but it just seems like it's run its course. And the Mannings have been through this before where the Colts kind of stepped away from Peyton. He found a new home and was able to succeed. So I still think Eli Manning at 36, close to 37, still has the arm and the ability to drive the football down the field, but he's going to need weapons around him. I know he has the weapons in New York, but they were very injured this season, and then that line did not help him at all. And he's not going to stand in the face of the teeth of the pocket. He's going to pick his spots and not take some big hits. So I think if he's given the opportunity to join Coughlin down in Jacksonville, he's going to take it, and we'll see where it can go from there. But that team has a great defense and a great running game.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the potential logical fit if they were to cut away from Eli in March and not give him that bonus, and then he's free to sign elsewhere. It's interesting because now you'll hear all these different names out there when head coaching vacancies are made available. I mean, you're looking at with the Eagles and DeFilippo and Schwartz. You're looking at Patricia. There's all these names out there. I think at the end of the day we might see 7 to 8. Maybe the high water mark would have been 10 different head coaching changes in the NFL. I'm curious, when you look at some of these teams right now, like, for instance, Andy Reid in Kansas City, I think he's somewhat safe. I think the seat's a little hot. But here's a team that started 5-0. They haven't been able to run the ball. They've gone back to mistake football, not mistake-free football. Even though Alex Smith played well last week, the defense let them down in the Jets. Does Kansas City have enough to regroup and win the AFC West?
Well, over the years of covering Andy Reid, I counted him out a number of times, but this team really just looks like they are heading down the wrong road, and they have some key divisional battles starting this week with Oakland, and the next week they have a Saturday game against the Chargers. They're going to have to win these games and win them convincingly. It's time for them to turn it around, and Andy can do it, but it's going to be a tough course. Right now, I think that the Chargers, though, are coming along, and they're probably the team to beat in the AFC West, but they're all tied at 6-6. So Reed is probably talking to his defensive coordinator. It seems like that's the area that the biggest need for this team, and they're going to need to figure out a way to overcome Eric Berry not being there. I know they lost him very early in the season, but it kind of turned their season around when he went out.
The Thursday night game tonight, New Orleans and Atlanta, and Atlanta's got to treat it like a playoff game. We already know what New Orleans does from an offensive standpoint. They're going to score a lot of points as well. That game's still indoors. Atlanta hasn't been that dominant team at home. To me, I think this is a make-or-break game for Atlanta. If they lose this one, they're going to be hard-pressed to make the playoffs. How do you see tonight? How do you see this game?
Yeah, you always think that Matt Ryan has the tough winning percentage in his home stadium, and he's going to try to defend that turf. We have seen them lose at home this season, so it's a tough proposition with them. It's all going to probably come down to, is Latimer going to be able to play the young corner that's playing so well for them, and are they able to take Julio Jones out of his rhythm? Jones is just incredible in that Ryan's given the time to drive the football down the field. Devontae Freeman no longer has a concussion, so he's going to be out there as well as Coleman, so they're going to try to establish a run and hit the play action. Obviously, the Saints, they've got to change what they're doing. Drew Brees not throwing the ball down the field as much. They're leaning on Ingram and Kamara, who's one of the top rookies out there. So I think this could be a high-scoring game, and I think in the end you'll probably see that the Falcons are going to defend their home turf, but a very close victory.
Minnesota and Carolina. Minnesota comes in riding high with Case Keenum playing out of his mind. I know we've talked about him over the last several weeks, but this is a team that all of a sudden they won 8 straight. They're scoring a ton of points. I don't think they've seen, a defense like Carolina, and I think Carolina, I think Cam Newton knows he's going to have to make some plays with his legs, but this is a huge game for both those teams, especially for Minnesota. Forget about an 8-game winning streak, but they're still trying to hold serve in the NFC, depending upon what the Eagles and the Rams do. I kind of lean towards Minnesota. I think if they were to trip up, it would be this week against Carolina, though.
Yeah, this is a tough road battle for Case Keenum, and he's got to play within himself. I'm not sold on Latavius Murray as a running back and a guy that can establish the pace of the game. I know he played pretty well for Oakland in the past, but they've had a tough time establishing the run, and the way that the Panthers get after the quarterback, I think this may be their chance. Unfortunately, last week, Panthers did not play that well against New Orleans, and you always look for Cam Newton to have a bounce-back game. They're really holding on to that 6th spot by a thread. And then if you see that Atlanta wins, they're really going to have that desperation out there. So a lot of desperation both sides. Minnesota wants to still be the number 1 seed and possibly play at home as the first Super Bowl team. So I think in this one, I'll go Carolina and come back to Cam.
All right, last one before we get to the commissioner's contract. You got the Eagles and the Rams, 425. The Eagles smacked in the mouth the other night against Seattle. Back on the road again against the Rams. I know there's some distractions out there with the wildfires, but the Eagles trying to get in some practices. Ertz still not cleared. That would be a huge loss to the offense. I think ultimately he's going to be able to go. But, I saw some things Sunday night where they just were not as aggressive. And the times they were aggressive, the Eagles I'm talking about, they weren't able to capitalize on some of these plays. And Carson Wentz uncharacteristically missed some throws. It's kind of a different animal with the Rams because you're going to have to be able, I think you're going to have to be able to at least score 25 to 28 points to win this game. Let me ask you something. Against that Rams defense, which I think is underrated, how do you see the Eagles offense? How do you see it playing out on Sunday?
Yeah, Q, they have to attack the Rams defense, who are surprisingly ranked 27th against the run. And they do have Aaron Donald in the middle, who's just a brick there, and they're going to have to move him off the spot and commit to the running game. Against Seattle, their leading rusher was J.J. with only 35 yards. They got to find a way to, and it may be they have too many running backs. They got to pick one of those guys and feed him the football, dictate the pace of the game, and then get after Jared Goff, whose line is with Andrew Whitworth is playing pretty well, but they can get around the edge on the other side of that line. So I expect a tough physical game. The team that's going to be able to run the football, whether it's Gurley or the Eagles running backs, is going to win this game. I think the Eagles, though, are going to bounce back. Last week they had too many penalties, and they lost the turnover battle. I think they turn that around this week, and they get a W in L.A.
All right, Goodell signs that contract extension. I talked about it during the opening monologue. We know about the money. I mean, his job is to make the NFL a ton of money. But if there were, and I know we're a little tight on time, but if there were 3 things you would tell Goodell, this is what I think you should focus on. For me, I look at, again, you might have to get rid of the Thursday night game. We know about the officiating. It's hard to cut down the violence of the game. We saw it on Monday night in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. But what do you think the commissioner, 3 things that people believe he would need to do to, quote, fix the ratings and fix the league?
Yeah, the first thing he's got to work on is consistency in terms of discipline. It just seems sometimes he goes harder at other players and lenient on other players. They need to make sure that they're like the Gronk play where he's only getting 1 game. I thought he should have got more than that. So he's got to make sure he cleans that up. They got to figure out in terms of the kneeling. I know there's this divide between the players, the owners, and what to do with the anthem. He's got to sit down and figure that thing out. And then he just needs to figure out how to connect with the players. I think there's just an overall disconnect between him and the players, us versus them. These younger guys coming along. Yeah, they hug him on draft day, but later on they're talking really bad about him, and they think that he's a company man.
Right.
He does work for the owners, and they just think it's us versus them. So he's got to connect with the players, and I think if the quality of play on the field and they figure out this anthem thing, you'll get the ratings back. I know the fans are still in love with football, but right now they're down on the fighting and the penalties and the suspension.
Listen, if the other sports leagues had the NFL's problems, they would be ecstatic. Even when you talk about the rate, because it's $1 billion industry. So, are they taking a hit? The NFL, yeah, but I mean, you're right. I think there's solutions to it, so we'll see how it plays out. All right, my friend, always appreciate it. Enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy the weekend slate of games. We'll talk next week. Always good insight.
All right, thanks for having me on.
All right, you got it. Lloyd Vance, NFL Network contributing writer.